Okay, we're joined now by the one and only Jordan Barry-Bayliss. Jordan's an award-winning FTSE CPO, Chief People Officer, and also is now focusing on executive performance. I'm very excited about this particular slot because we've talked a bit about the technology behind AI, but one thing that's coming out loud and clear is that it's not just a technology problem. There's a massive impact on the operating model and the people. And so, Jordan, I'm hoping that you can help us unpack that a little bit and share some of your experience. So, Jordan, can you help us understand how AI is changing the way that businesses operate day to day?
So I tell you what's really interesting for me is if you look at new businesses that are set up from scratch, the way that they are constructed is materially different. And I think, as we know, with it's an age-old problem. If the system's broken, overlaying a load of AI isn't going to fix it. And I think that's the problem for a lot of large organizations. I think, AI has been kind of seen as a silver bullet, but I think it's about the parameters being set effectively and not necessarily rushing into it. I think some time to test it, particularly close to customer interactions, those types of things is going to be really, really important.
Okay, so I think a lot of people who will be listening to this pod will be in brownfield businesses. They're already established, they're already running, and they're looking to kick on with their performance somehow and are eyeing AI as one of the tools to help them get there. So when they look at those established operating models, what are the signs that they should observe which tell them that that old operating model is now starting to creak a bit and is not really fit for purpose in the future?
I mean, I would think that in most cases, organizations that review their operating model even before AI was a thing is really, really important. I think a lot of operating models are creaking because actually they are designed around old systems. They're designed on hierarchies. They're designed on, spans of control and layers. Layers from the CEO down to the front line of your customer. So I think that my advice to all businesses in this kind of system is rather than looking at a structure, start to think about an ecosystem. AI being one bit, it's not going to solve absolutely everything. And I think also, if you think about, efficiency versus long-term kind of impact, efficiency is only going to take you so far. So with AI, for example, it's a kind of a race to the bottom. We're all going to be efficient with AI after a period of time. It's those that adapt to AI and utilize it properly that are going to have the biggest impact. And I think, small sample sizes and test cases in the environment are really, really clear, because also, unless the people operating the AI and close to it in their own ecosystem understand it and know how to apply it, they know the limitations, and they get to feel and experience it, I think it becomes a one-dimensional zero-sum game.
Okay, so I think one of the things we're hearing about is the synthetic organisation now. So you've got agentic processes starting to be built where you've got agents running some of the routine processes, but you've always got a human in the loop. It's essential to make sure that you don't get errors creeping in or problem surfacing, but you've got those humans working in a synthetic team with a number of AI robots. So how do you start navigating towards an operating model like that, where you've got that hybrid between people and technology? And how do you manage things like culture, progression within the roles, performance management?
So I think the impact of AI where it's really, really useful is in the efficiency gains. And I think, it also removes human error if done well. So where we're seeing kind of the biggest impact, I think, is where you've got customer services, for example. We've got an AI chatbot and all of a sudden it's interacting. And what you can ultimately do is feed all of your information in, all of your employment law, if you're working in an HR department, all of your kind of customer centricity points into an AI, and it's going to replicate it in a really systematic way. Well, from a customer perspective, they're going to get the right answer probably most of the time, so it's going to work. I think in terms of culture, I don't think we know enough about it yet. And also, I guess for me, culture is something that organizations do really well, and sometimes stuff that they do really badly. And I think AI and culture, again, it goes back to the point before. I think if you are I think your culture is an independent thing regardless of AI. I think AI just has to become part of the culture. And I think, it's a bit like culture gets set around the top table. I think AI will probably be the same. And I think what I'm seeing in lots of organizations is we can fall into the trap of seeing it be, as senior leaders, of culture being seen as something that kind of happens over there, a bit like AI. And I think particularly in the work that I'm doing at the moment, the AI kind of, the analog style of leadership that we have, that we're institutionalized in, that we've operated in for such a long time, is not AI enabled. So I think first and foremost, I think there's a big piece to do around the top table so that we are really quite proficient and comfortable, but we understand how AI is being kind of applied within our organizations rather than leaving it to someone else and just assuming that it's happening well. So I think that's going to be really, really key for organizations. And I think how AI works in different organizations, it needs to be applied differently. It's not just a one shoe fits all. I think you've got to really understand it, get underneath the bonnet and trial it, test it, but don't assume that it's going to solve absolutely everything for you. And I think the understanding of how it works, and that's why I said kind of small test cases in specific areas where teams become used to it, they get they become, part and parcel of the design, is going to be really, really key. And I think the step outs to the process. But I think the problem is that we live in a very short term kind of, we like short term profit, we like short term strategy. I think there's so much going on at the moment, the way that leaders think is short term, and I think actually we need to be thinking a bit more long term about this. So, for example, what happens after AI? What happens when we've applied it everywhere and every organisation is the same? Well, what's the difference and what's the gain?
And I think the problem in many businesses that I've seen is it's such a loaded question around culture. You get so much passive resistance building up because people have got a different perception of what AI means to them. They may feel a little bit exposed that they don't understand enough about it where others do, so they don't want to look like they're not keeping up. And then there's a large section of the business who are fearful about what it means to their personal roles.
Yeah.
So how do you take that culture question head on from the board? Because I think if you don't do it, it's going to have an impact on the culture of your business further down, regardless.
It is, and I think it's a bit like, when organisations do things to their people rather than engaging them in the process and making sure that everybody has skin in the game, it's a very different impact and experience. Culture's the same. If someone writes a load of values on a board and then expects that to be the culture in an organisation, well, nobody buys into that. But if you involve the whole organisation in designing that culture, defining it, a bit like the AI, it will be the same thing. And I think the transparency and the communication is really, really key. And I think the fear factor is a really good one, Ian, because everybody's fearful of AI. We think, I don't know if it's part of the whole propaganda, but we're kind of led to believe that AI is going to, get rid of everybody's jobs. And for me, I mean, we've had a lot of silver bullets before, haven't we? We've had offshoring. Yeah. I remember when I was working at Shell, we offshored everything, and then between 5 and 7 years later, it was all brought back in because the customer experience was terrible. Yeah. So following the profit at expense of everything is not what this game is for me. I think using it in an intelligent way and using that symbiotic kind of partnership between humans and AI is where it will win. But again, there'll be companies just looking for the efficiency gain, and it'll be a short-term gain, and then it will go full cycle and it won't work, and they'll probably have wasted loads of money on it. Or you think about, how do we do this over a period of time that feels comfortable, that feels natural, that works? You've got to look at everything. You've got to look at the workforce impact. You've got to look at the customer experience. And at the moment, because the markets are so tight, it's all a profit game. And profit is only going to get you so far. If you're only looking to make profit and reduce cost, we know where that goes. Yeah. It's a very short-term fix.
So how do you break that down into practical steps, Jordan? Is this something that, for example, you need to appoint your award-winning Chief People Officer to... That's another 15 quid you owe me. Is this something you appoint your Chief People Officer to champion and to drive a very tangible set of steps around how the business embraces AI? Or is it something a little bit more diffuse where each of the directorates of their own have a role? What's your formula for cultural success here?
Look, I think it's like a strategy, isn't it? The best strategies are really clear, really simple to understand. So for me, an organization starts with what are we trying to achieve from AI, and we're really transparent about it. So if it's efficiency gains, in which areas and how it wants to be applied, what are you looking for? Let's be really clear on that. I think organizations far too often make very strong, very, very bold decisions without really understanding the impact to the people or the customers. And I think at the moment, customer experience is terrible across. I mean, I can't remember the last time I had a good customer experience. And when you do, it's so shocking. You're like, oh my God, I've had a great customer experience. If we throw the baby out with the bathwater on this, we're really going to be on a hiding to nothing. I really do believe that. And I think there's several components to this. I think we need to understand as leaders, what are the fears within our organization? What are the ideas that our workforce have around the application of AI, rather than it being told and done to? And again, looking at the longer term beyond just the efficiency gain. I think, what else would I suggest about the kind of the winning approach to this is find out amongst your competitors who's doing this really, really well. Make sure there's a real understanding of what AI is about in an organization and make it part of your culture. It's just an additional thing that we now have to introduce, but make sure it's living and breathing. Remove the fear factor by communicating really clearly on what you're trying to achieve from it and how it's going to impact people, but involve them. It's a bit like the exam question. If there's only 3 of you solving the exam question, you've already limited your chances. If you're involving the whole organization and being part of that, the skin in the game is really important. I mean, if you look at the engagement scores, of organizations, they are absolutely through the floor. I think the average UK employee is productive for 3 hours a day. That's it. So we can already guarantee that people are already pissed off about work. They're already feeling disenfranchised. They're already feeling like they're working for people that they don't trust. So I think there's so many different facets to this. And I think if we take our eye off the ball of all of the other things that are going wrong and only focus on AI, I think that's going to be a big mistake as well. So I think, there's so much going on, isn't there, in organizations, and particularly for C-suites. I mean, there's so much stuff going on for C-suites. The idea that a C-suite can be strategic and have time to think and plan, it's almost kind of utopian, isn't it? So I think dialing it all down and being really deliberate about what you will do and what you won't do, and don't rush. I think it's a bit like writing a board paper really quickly and then missing all the points and then getting there and thinking, shit, I've missed that and I've missed this, and then looking like a fool. You need to take your time on this kind of stuff and get it right. The organizations that get it right will be the ones that are successful.
So coming back to that kind of communication and engagement point that you mentioned, Jordan. So, I think you said that one of the first objectives that you'd expect to hear around AI is that it drives efficiency.
Yeah.
And, putting tools like Agentic in place certainly will give you a one-off efficiency hit, but a significant one all the same. But that comes from running your processes with less people in them.
Yes.
And your workforce will be very alive to that question. You also said you need to communicate and involve them in that journey. So therein lies a problem, that if you communicate early and involve your workforce in this objective, which is to be more efficient with less people, then right from the start you're signalling to them that there's going to be a need for less of them. So how do you manage that tension of keeping people engaged but not so fearful that they then disengage and perhaps go off and work for somebody else, or
I think it's a balancing
sabotage
act,
the process?
and I think this is about instinct and good judgment. I mean, let's be really clear, what makes the best leaders? Good judgment. They know how to dial something up and how to dial it down, and that's going to be really key on this. I think consistency of messaging as well is really, really, really important. But I think there's a whole heap of opportunities here. So if I think about the organizations that I'm involved with where we're designing from scratch, it's a completely different ecosystem. And I talked about ecosystem deliberately at the beginning of this kind of podcast, because it's not a system, it's an ecosystem. And AI is part of the ecosystem. It's one thing that you dial up and dial down. It's how it impacts everything else. So what I'm seeing in terms of, and this is regardless of AI, this isn't just because of the AI introduction, but the organizations are looking at being able to respond and be fluid to live events. Now, we're living in a time, aren't we, with unprecedented volatility and unpredictability. We've never had markets reacting like this. We've never had such geopolitical instability, and this is having a huge impact. So it's a bit like Darwinian theory. You know, it's those that are most adaptable for me that are going to survive the longest. It's not about the strongest. It's about those that are really alive to what's going on. So if I think about some of the examples of businesses that I'm involved with at the moment that we're designing from scratch, we have a core team of experts. We have a real clear, definitive idea of what the technology does. But also what we're seeing is a much more skilled, broader base of roles. So, you know, not someone that just comes in and does this, but someone that does this and up and down, and their roles are bigger. And also, if you think about, I think part of the problem is when you're starting from scratch with new founders who are more, they're less wedded to the hierarchies and the infrastructures that we've become acclimatized to, that we feel status as a result of, that we gain a sense of self because we're at the top of the food chain. It's a network of people. You've got fungible roles, people that can do each other's roles. I'm even involved with Corporate Rebels, so we're looking at self-managed organizations. And there is a huge kind of data set around the value of self-managed organizations, the engagement, if you're in a health business, the fact that has a material, you know, impact on your kind of safety as a like a health provider. There's a whole heap of stuff going on, but it seems to be kind of a bit over here, and I'm wondering how we just bring it over here slightly, and there's a meeting in the middle. So, you know, you're looking at pools of consultants, fractional senior kind of people that come in that you can dial up, and it's much more flexible. And I think that's the problem with the current operating models. They're not flexible, they're static.
I agree.
Yeah.
So I really like the idea that you've described about what this future business looks like.
Yeah.
Broader, less siloed roles, a mix between permanent and fractional and perhaps associate staff and so on. But how do you navigate from where we are today with a brownfield legacy business to tomorrow, given that in the board they will have their own fiefdoms that they want to protect and
systems
and their own systems and their own established ways of working? So how do you go from here to there?
Well, I mean, I think what we're going to see, unfortunately, is there's a lot of emotional connection and a lot of status orientation with the kind of personal connection with existing systems. So if you're on a board, you've worked in the system that you were probably part of designing all those years ago. It's worked for you for the last however many years.
Yeah.
What incentive do you have to change that, other than the fact that, you know, pretty soon we're going to see that these systems are going to start to collapse. So you can see it everywhere.
Yeah.
These systems are collapsing at an alarming scale around the world. We're just not talking
And it's
about
only
it.
natural to hold on to your power and your
Absolutely.
agency in that environment, isn't it?
But there's an education piece, and I think, you know, one of the interesting things, and it's a bit of a kind of an off-the-cuff kind of example, but if you look at so many founders that I work with now are not looking at floating on the stock market in an IPO. They're looking to do an ETO because they want to give it back. They want to do something sustainable. They're not bought into the metrics that define what the success and the value of their organisation is, based on something that's hundreds and hundreds of years old. That's a great example of people going, not for me. This system's not working for me anymore. So I think there's an education piece, because broken systems are the problem. And we know that, think about, you know, you and I could be put on death row tomorrow in those awful environments, and we become a product of that environment, because that's human nature. So if we don't change the systems, then we're all going to do the same thing. We can say the right thing, but we're not really bought into the kind of the long-term view of why and the benefit. And I think, I'm not sure if we're going to get brownfield sites doing the right thing very well. You know, think about acquisitions. What do large organisations do when they need to bring in a new technology? They buy a company because they're not capable of building that expertise internally, because the systems resist it. We resist the change, we resist the innovation. It's going to be the same thing. So I think we're going to enter a really, really interesting point economically, because we're going to see the companies that do this really well, because they're listening. And I think part of the privilege of being a senior leader, you stop listening. And I think actually we need to start listening more to what's actually going on. We need to open our eyes and plug in, you know, come down from our ivory towers and really see what's going on in an organisation, and then see it particularly on the front line with your customers. You know, this kind of stuff's going to be really, really important, and traditional systems are breaking down and it's the next evolution. We don't really know what that, but I find that quite exciting because I think it's needed.
So if you think about how you'd construct a board looking forward to navigate this new paradigm, right? So to start with, perhaps you need a responsible owner on that board to help drive the new thinking and to help pull everybody together into a certain direction. Does that mean you need a chief AI officer, or is that something that the chief people officer?
I think what we need to do is, in my experience of how I've immersed boards in new ways of thinking, is show them, not tell them. Take them to an organisation that's doing this really, really well. Help them understand, help them be immersed in the environment to really understand what needs to change and the limitations. So, if we need to connect the bottom of the organisation with the top. I mean, and I do this as part of the work that I do. I take C-suites down to the front for a week, front line of their own businesses, and they're horrified by what they see. Because they're so far removed from the detail. It's just so convenient up here, isn't it? It's so wonderful to just sit here and just think that everything's working exactly as you think, and it's not. But when they've had that experience and they've done the grunt work, they've listened to the people on the front line, they've taken the phone calls, all of a sudden they come back like evangelists. It's so powerful, and it's not rocket science to get this stuff right, but we really do need to be a bit more alive to what is actually required in order to really understand the problem. And I think that's about stepping out of your ivory towers and connecting and listening to what's going on in your organisation, being interested, being curious. I think the more seasoned we become, the less curious we are. And I think that's the Achilles heel.
Yeah. So let's talk a bit about the role that the people or HR, call it what you want to function, has in this transformation. I feel a bit old word calling it HR. But how does HR as a function develop in this new AI-enabled world? What does it do more of? What does it do less of?
Well,
how does the role in the board change?
It's really interesting. I've had the privilege of working in exceptional HR functions, but they're few and far between. And I think the idea, every single CPO or HR role that's advertised pretty much talks about being strategic. And we're still talking about it, and that's been for the last 20 years. So I think, unfortunately, until organisations have experienced great HR for themselves and senior leaders, I don't think they know what great HR is. I think it's a necessary evil, so that's the first part. I think the idea that all of a sudden HR becomes an enabler of AI in a business where HR's the do-as-you-told department and probably very transactional and talking about policy and process, I'm not sure how you do that. I think in the organisations where HR leads the business, because it's got superbly talented people in there that are commercial, that speak the business's language, but similarly you've got business leaders that understand that if you get the people stuff right, then it has that's the common denominator. I think when you get that stuff right, so I think HR has a huge role to play. But I'm not sure the role of HR is working well in many organisations anyway. So the idea that all of a sudden we're going to now dump AI on HR as the evangelist and the people that are going to teach the organisation how to use it, I just don't think that's realistic.
Yeah.
I think redesigning HR, recalibrating what the role of HR is to be an accelerator of that, absolutely. I think if it works well in a good HR function, I think they can absolutely play that role. But I don't see... if I'm being really honest, I've worked in HR for years. I don't see many HR functions who are operating in that spot. Not always because of their lack of capability, but often resistance from the business about what does good HR look like. It talks to you about not being great at leadership. It talks to you about demonstrating bad behaviours. It talks about having the wrong values. That's not cool with a lot of leaders.
Yeah.
So I think HR has a great role to play in this if you are open to HR playing a proper role in your business. And we know the organisations that do that, they're the ones that the ones that perform the best.
Yeah, and I guess HR itself needs to transform, doesn't it? Because
absolutely.
If you take a step back and look at some of the things that HR does in a sort of medium to large business, there's a lot of processing in there.
There is.
Which I think could be subject to some of the agentic automation that we've been talking about.
Absolutely.
And then there's a redeployment of resources within HR towards doing the business partnering that you've just described.
Yeah, the strategic value add.
Exactly that.
Yeah.
So could you just say a little bit more about how HR itself needs to perhaps lead that transformation away from the sort of cost center mentality towards the helping to then redesign the organisation and the operating model and doing that business partnering to help get the best out of topics like AI?
Yeah, it's a really interesting question, because I think, I fundamentally believe in the value of HR, and I've had the privilege of working in some of the best organisations in the world where HR is done really, really well. I think similarly, my own experience of HR is completely underwhelming. Let's be honest. So I think HR needs a complete rethink, full stop. I think it's out of step. I think it's seen as an overhead. I think it's focusing on all of the wrong stuff. I think there needs to be a real recalibration about what is HR here for in our business. If HR is just there to do policy and process, dumb it right down and just keep it there. If HR is there to be strategic and drive culture and teach leaders how to be great leaders, that's a completely different paradigm. So I think first and foremost, I would be encouraging top teams to be having a really honest conversation about what the role of HR is in their business, and being honest about it and not uncomfortable. And I think get some expertise in to really show you what great HR could look like, so that you can then really use it as a catalyst for great things in your business. But far too often what we have in HR is not working, it's underinvested in, it isn't AI enabled, there's loads of optionality about it, we haven't got the right capability. And I think there are great examples of really good quality HR functions. I think PE is a great example of that. If you look at the calibre and the academic track record of the people, they recruit the best people, and you can see and feel that in their business. They're advising, they're getting the best talent in, it works. But far too often it's not. It's seen as a necessary evil, so the investment in HR is kind of quite minimal. And that's the problem.
Yeah. And if I look at the HR role inside policy and legal, dealing with employers' rights, one thing I'm hearing a bit about now is that employees now all have access to ChatGPT
So
and whatever.
true.
And whenever
dangerous.
any HR issue or policy issue or redundancy comes up, immediately you've got a very detailed challenge coming from all of those employees who have got access to this kind of large language model. So how do you tee up your people function to anticipate that kind of reaction and to manage it?
Well, I think it's really interesting, isn't it? Because I think often, unfortunately for HR, they're involved too late in the process. So when there's been a breakdown in the relationship with the line manager and the individual, which is ultimately what causes the case and the person complaining and blah, 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 I think the sooner HR can get into that problem to negate and kind of appease any kind of discomfort and disconnect is really, really important. I guess with this one, it's a really interesting one, because you are going to get people now who have access and who are fully informed, which is just going to mean that HR departments are going to have to really pull the socks up and be all over the detail of this kind of stuff. I think we're also, if we're being really honest, I think employment law works for a lot of organisations because they are reliant on the fact that most employees aren't really au fait with it, and therefore sometimes they can get away with stuff that they might not be able to. But I think it's equipping individuals in a different way. So I think, how do you deal with it? I don't think we know enough about it yet. We've seen, I'd be really interesting to see in 12 months, 24 months, how the access that employees have to AI, how that's actually increased the number of ETs that we've got, or the quality of ET cases going through, for example. We don't have that data yet, but I think it will.
ET being employment tribunal.
Yeah.
Okay. So standing back as an award-winning CPO.
That's another 50 quid.
I'm milking it. What would be your highest priority use cases that you'd focus on today for AI?
So give me a bit more information about what you're specifically looking for. So when you say high priority, what specifically you're?
Well, I think if you look at the agenda that you described earlier on, the first agenda that okay, so trying to distill that to some takeaways, Jordan. So if you're sat in front of the board of a mid-cap and advising them, what do they need to do from a people and HR perspective around the topic of AI? What are your top 3 or 4 points, and what other practical actions you'd recommend they take?
I think first and foremost, understand AI, not just as a theory and a concept, but as something that you can feel and experience for yourself, sat around a board. And I think going back to the floor is quite a good way of doing that. I think being really clear on your AI strategy and what you're trying to achieve and being transparent about that. But then it's a bit like an action learning set that you do in a kind of a leadership academy. This is the problem, leave them with it, and then see what comes back. I think a lot of organisations are going to do a dumb too, and they're going to get it wrong. And they're going to disenfranchise a load of people in the process. I think, let's talk about what we're trying to achieve, communicate it really clearly, but then give people the opportunity in different areas of the business to trial it and come back and test it in real time and then iterate. It's a bit like lean, lean thinking, and also kind of, what's the
Six Sigma?
Six Sigma and the, I've had a mental block. It must be because I'm getting old. I think
maybe we've got an AI tool that can help us.
Yeah, maybe we can
that.
plug me into AI and it'll be a lot better. I think that trialing it in real time is really, really key, and kind of learning as you go and sharing that knowledge. And I still can't think of the word that I'm thinking of for scrums. They've got scrum. What's it? Sprints. That's what we mean. Sprints. Yeah. So you kind of agile methodology where you're testing it in real time. You're talking about it. You're finding out what's working. You're tweaking what isn't. I think let's be a bit more inventive. I think about how we're dealing with it and solving.
Okay. And practical action a CPO of a mid-cap can take today on this topic.
Practical. What, from an HR perspective or just generally?
From an HR perspective.
It's a loaded question.
I'm going to get shot again after this answer. I'm going to ask for 50 quid back. For God's sake, just get someone at the top of HR who gets the stuff and is an evangelist and really excited about it and sees the opportunity, not someone that who is resistant to it. I think you need someone in HR who is all over this and sees it as an opportunity and then can sell that vision to an HR function and the business.
So an HR leader needs to get curious about what AI means.
Well, they
start
need to
coming up with their own.
Well, more than
ideas.
curious. I think you need someone in there that's actually turned on by AI and gets it and wants to explore with it and wanting to explore the possibilities. Not talk about how it can't work and what the policy is on it.
Yeah. Okay.